Let's talk sourdough. So I have been baking sourdough bread for I think 4 years now. And I think I've gotten a lot of people into sourdough, but I've never done like a video showing how I do it and my process. So I'm gonna start one today. So you can use so this video is not how to make your own starter. I would suggest looking at a different resource for that, buying one from a farmer's market, getting one from a friend, ordering some dehydrated starter online and starting that, because this is not that. This is once you have an active starter. So for me, I keep my starter in the fridge until I'm ready to use it. And because mine is so active, I know that I can, depending on what I'm making, like if I'm making a traditional loaf of sourdough bread, I can pull it out that morning out of the fridge, feed it one time and bake with it. But sometimes if your starter is less active, you want to feed it more than once before you bake with it. So for example, you'd pull it out at the night before, you'd feed it and then discard some and feed it again in the morning. And then once it's risen to its full height, then you're ready to bake with it. Okay, one thing I forgot to cover is tools you need. So a jar for your sourdough starter, which if you're watching this video, hopefully you already have an active starter. A kitchen scale that will do grams, a bowl to mix in, and a banneton to put the loaf in once it's shaped, and then a bread lame or you can use a razor blade. I used a knife in the beginning, so you don't have to have like the bread lame, but something to score the bread with, essentially. And what else? Oh, a Dutch oven, because you're going to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. You need a cast iron. Yes, she agrees. You need a cast iron Dutch oven. And ideally some oven mitts that are good for high heat. Okay, so for standard 1 loaf of bread, what I usually do is 2/3 of a cup of flour and 1/4 cup of water. And for your water, you want it to be an unchlorinated source. So we have well water, so I don't have to, buy anything special. But if you're in the city, I think some people use spring water or distilled water, and they will use their tap water but let it sit out for 24 hours. The chlorine has time to like effervesce and get out of the system. So 2/3 a cup of water, and then 2/3 a cup flour, 1/2 a cup of water, and then stir it up. You can use anything to stir it. Doesn't have to be wood. I've used stainless steel spoons. It doesn't have to be wood. And it should be the consistency of like a thick cake batter. And ideally you want your water to be lukewarm, but I just get it out of our RO system. So it is like kind of cold because it's well water, but ideally you want it to be lukewarm. Temperature really affects fermentation rate, so you're likely to get a faster rise on your bread if you use warm water. So just giving it a good stir after I added both, and then I'll show you the consistency. So this is the consistency that you're looking for. It's pretty thick, and I just use a regular lid, and then you'll see it. I try to clean up the sides sometimes so that I reuse my jar. I know people will pour into a new jar every time, but I am lazier than that. So I just kind of scrape down the sides so you can see where you started from. And in a couple hours, you should see some pretty good bubbles. So I want to touch a little bit more on the active and the discard process, because I think this is where a lot of people get confused. So I keep both of these in my fridge most of the time. When I'm ready to bake, I pull out my active, and I only need about 1 or 2 tablespoons of starter to feed with. So I will actually take this jar and pour most of it into my discard jar. And yeah, this is not pretty, but this is what I work with. I'll pour out most of this, except like 1 or 2 tablespoons and into this jar, and then this will go back in the fridge. And I use this for all kinds of recipes that use discard: muffins, biscuits, crepes, naan, cookies, pancakes, all kinds of stuff use discard. So save your discard. When I first started, I thought discard was trash, so I was throwing it away. But keep it, use it for other recipes, and then feed this one. And then it'll, get all bubbly and it'll rise a bunch. And if for whatever reason you don't end up baking with it, or it didn't rise as much as you wanted it to before you bake with it, you will let it get all active. And then once it starts to drop back down, that's when it's considered in the discard phase. Also, if your starter develops a dark liquid on top, that is called hooch, and it is a normal byproduct of fermentation. So just pour it off or stir it in. It just means your starter is hungry. Okay, so your starter is ready to bake with when it has at least doubled in size. So you can see we are ready to go. So, got our kitchen scale and a bowl, and I'll show you the next step. Okay, we've got our scale, we add our bowl, we tare it, and then I add about 315 to 350 grams of water. And then we take our starter, and I do about 100 to 120 grams of starter. So it's nice and bubbly. Should smell good too. And when you add it, it should float. So it was 130, and we actually have quite a bit left. So you could technically probably make 2 loaves out of what you fed. If you fed 2/3 of a cup of flour and 1/2 a cup of water, you could make 2 loaves with that. But that'll also have some nice discard that we can save and use for other recipes. So we'll give that a nice little mix. You can use your hands, you can use a fork, a spoon. I have this dough hook. Give it a little mix. And then tare again. And then for 1 loaf, you want about 500 grams of flour. And it can be, I just use organic all-purpose for this loaf, but I have also done whole wheat and rye and einkorn and different variations of those. So another good one is like 300 grams of all-purpose, and then 100 grams of rye and 100 grams of whole wheat. And you can play around with it and see what you like. But I am just gonna go with 500 grams of all-purpose, organic all-purpose. And there we go. Doesn't have to be exact. And then you're going to, the first time you mix your dough, it's gonna be pretty shaggy. You can use the dough hook. I'll probably do that just to keep my hands from getting nasty, but it'll be a pretty sticky dough in the beginning. So give that a good mix, and we'll let it sit for about 30 minutes. Okay, after your dough has sat for about 30 minutes, you're gonna come back and add your salt, and if needed, a little bit of water just to help mix everything in. And at this point, the gluten strands should have started to form, so the dough should be a little bit easier to work with, and the salt helps that as well. Alright, so give that a good mix. Get that salt incorporated really nicely. And this is where you can start the stretch and fold process. I'm not doing a full stretch and fold yet, but it helps to try and mix the salt in. After you've mixed it in pretty good, let the dough rest for about 30 minutes and you're going to come back and do your first set of stretch and fold. Alright, so this is the stretch and fold process. You're basically lifting one side of the dough and folding it over on itself. This helps form good structure, air pockets, and things like that. And you want to do it on all sides of the dough, so about 4 to 6 per stretch and fold. And you want to do this about every 30 minutes for the first 2 hours, so about 2 to 4 total series of stretch and fold. And cover with a plate. I've used a towel before, but it tends to dry out a little bit, so cover with a plate. That's my helpful tip. And this is another 30 minutes later. I'm doing another series of stretch and fold. And then after I've done the stretch and fold process 2 to 4 times, I'll let it just bulk ferment on the counter for about another 2 to 3 hours until it's doubled in size. Then I stick the whole thing in the fridge, plate and all. So then we pour our dough out on the counter and allow it to bench rest for about 10 minutes. And this is where you can start shaping it. So I stretch it out, as you can see, and then I'll just fold it over into thirds. And this, again, builds structure and air pockets in your bread. And then this is where it gets fun. I like this part. It's my favorite part, where you do this push-pull thing, and you can see that it builds tension, and the outside of your bread will get really smooth. And this is like, I don't know if there's a technical process. I just push it away and pull it towards you. And practice with it. It makes it get less sticky as you do it. And it looks really nice. You can see it's built some nice tension. You can see some air pockets starting to form. You let it rest for about 10 minutes and then shape again. And this time you'll notice it's a lot harder to spread out because it's built so much tension with your last process. You can skip this if you want to and just shape it once, but I like to do it twice so I can see how well it's like forming. And I did kind of a different shape this time, and just like a fold over shape, and then I'll do the push pull process again. You can see it's building a really nice loaf shape. And then you get your banneton and you put some flour in it and drop your loaf in upside down so it can form in this shape of your banneton, and then you can pinch the bottom together if you want to and put that back in the fridge for about an hour while your Dutch oven preheats. Then it's time for scoring. I dump my loaf out on parchment paper, and you can score some pretty fun designs. Sorry, this is a little blurry. There we go. So I just did the deep, obviously the deep cut is where it's going to allow for expansion. So make your deep cut where you want the bread to expand the most, otherwise it will just kind of explode. You can make it look really pretty. And then take your hot Dutch oven out and put your cold bread in. And turn it to the oven, and I drop my temperature down to 475. And I bake it for 25 minutes. After 25 minutes, remove the lid, and you can see how beautiful it looks already. And then I drop the heat again and bake for another about 12 minutes. And take it out and try and get the bread out as quickly as you can so it doesn't continue to bake in the Dutch oven. And there you